Curious George goes to the hospital. This is George. He lived with his friend, the man in the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey, but he was always curious. Today, George was curious about the big box in the man's desk. What could be in it? George could not resist. He simply had to open it. It was full of funny little pieces, all sorts of shapes and all sorts of colors. George took one out. He looked like a piece of candy. Maybe it was candy. Maybe he could eat it. But George put a piece in his mouth, and before he knew it, he had swallowed it. While later, the man with the yellow hat that came up and says, "George, I see you have already opened the box with a jigsaw puzzle. It was supposed to be a surprise for you. Well, let's go on it." Finally, it was finished, and with almost finishing, one piece was missing. Man looked at it for everywhere. He could not find it. But the strange, he said, is a brand new puzzle. Well, it cannot be helped. Maybe we can find it in the morning. Let's go to bed now, George. The next morning, George did not feel well. He had a tummy ache and did not want to eat his breakfast. The man was worried. He went to the telephone and called Dr. Baker. "I'll be over as soon as I can," said the doctor. First, Dr. Baker looked down George's throat. He looked down outside. "Listen, I'm not what's wrong," he said. "You better take George to the hospital and have an x-ray taken. You can call him and let him know we're coming." "Don't worry, George," said the man we've had him drive to the hospital. "You have been here before. You have broke your leg. Remember how nice the doctors and nurses were?" George held his big rubber ball tight as he walked up the hospital steps. A nurse took him down a long hallway to a room. She gave George something to drink that looked something that tasted sweet. "It's called barium." The nurse explained to help doctors find out what's wrong with you. Barium. Next to the room, he stood at a table. The doctor was putting a heavy apron. Then he gave the man with one just like it. George was curious what he got into. He did not. "Yes, get into that table, George." The doctor said, "I'm going to take some x-ray pictures of your insides." He pushed the button, and there was a funny noise. "Now, though you may be up, while the x-rays developed right away. Now, let's see. There's something there that should not be." The doctor said, "We look away at x-rays." "Why? That looks like, well, I think it must be the piece that was missing in your jigsaw puzzle yesterday." Well. At least we have no wrong with your little patient. I'll be Dr. Drake right away. George have to stay at the hospital a few days. I'll put tube down the throat. Peace out. It's only takes a small operation. I'll call a nurse and have a take him in the office. Many people were waiting outside the office. George had to wait too. "Look, Betsy," the woman next to him said to her little girl. Betsy looked at the moment, and then you find a smile. Betsy had never looked at the hospital before. She was scared. Finally, it was George's turn. A pretty young nurse sat him next to the room, and how many rooms, how many nurses were there? One nurse wrote down a lot of things about George. His name and his address were his nurse bracelet around his wrist. "It was your name, George." She said, "That's for everybody that knows who you are." Then the pretty young nurse came back. "My name is Carol. I'm going to take care of you to your room now. We can call the children's ward, and that's to your bed. And with lots of children to keep you company." And so it was. There was a lot of children in the room. Some were up, around, others were in the beds, with a doctor and nurse looking after them. Dave was having a blood transfusion. Steve had a little bandage and it was sitting on a go-kart. Betsy was in a bed, looking sad. George got next to the bed, next to Betty. George was glad when he was in the bed at last. His tummy was hurting again. The man sat for a while. "Now I'm going to leave you, George," he finally said. "I'll be back at the first thing in the morning to take you to the operating room." Nurse Carol was talking, and then when he came to sleep, then he left George. He sat and cried. He had promised. The man was back early next morning. The nurses were keeping George very busy. One nurse was taking the temperature and was taking blood pressure and was giving a pill, and they're getting ready to give him a shot. "It's going to hurt, George, but only for a moment." Then she took the arm. George let out a scream, but the needle hadn't touched him yet. And then it was done. That was not too bad, was it? No, it really was not. Anyway, it was over now. By the time the attendant came to the stretcher to wheel him over to the operating room, George was getting sleepy. He tried hard to stay awake, but was curious to see what would happen next. He could see a big table, bright lamps over the doctors, nurses, and all around. He had crabs' heads and masks over their faces. Their eyes were showing. One of the doctors winked at George and patted on the head, and the doctor stood back to her house. We all started. He looked funny and he was masked, and then George was fast asleep. And then George woke up and did what would happen. He knew that it was Carol. It was all done. We got a piece out in a day or two. It was running around again. The man bought a picture book, and George felt sick and dizzy. His throat was hurting, and he was not even curious about what's new book. Now, he was going to sleep. He was going to sleep better. The next morning, George felt better. He even had ate a dish of ice cream. Dr. Baker came to see him, and the man, of course, came to him. Bessie was watching from time to time. She seemed less sad, but it was still not a smile. Steve waved the go-kart over George's bed. Tomorrow I can get up and try to walk. Boy, I can hardly wait. I'll take you to the playroom now, George. George says the next room, and in the afternoon we'll finally take you home. The playroom was in the full children, and the lady was showing Bessie how her finger paint. And there all sorts of things played with. Even a puppet theater. And that was the first thing that George had 4 hands, so you could handle the 4 puppets at the same time. George was giving the real puppet show with a dragon, clown, and a bear, and a policeman. The children laughed, and he shouted, and even Bessie, for the first time, smiled a little. There was a TV in the playroom and also the record player. George was curious, and he was climbing on the record player, and he turned the switch. Would it go around and around like a merry-go-round? It did. It started slowly. Then it went faster and faster and faster. Ooh, George had lost his balance and sailed through the air. Look at George land in a soft cushion. George cheered. Betsy smiled again. George was so funny. But then a lady picked up George. That was enough for you. You better take a nap before lunch. He had a big day ahead of us. The mayor is coming to visit the hospital today, and later we'll be going home with George. When George woke up, Steve was just taking off his first steps, and the nurse was helping him. The children were watching. The go-kart was standing there empty. George was curious. He looked at it and then climbed into it. Then he grabbed the wheels and then, while nobody was looking, wheeled the go-kart right out of the room. George could make the go-kart very fast, but it was then fun. Hall went, and nurses noticed that he was going down. But George was too excited to listen. He wheeled the center around the corner and ramped up the floor. Some was busy pushing lunch carts and the doctors. Nurses were showing the mayor around. George tried to stop. It was too late. The go-kart landed right in the middle of everything. The lunch cart stumbled. Pinches scrambled. Lunch bars jammed on the floor. People fell over. Then George was shown the go-kart landed right to the mayor's arms. What a mess it was. You broke all the dishes, someone cried, and you ruined the go-kart. What did the mayor think of it? Whispered someone else, and it was. Suddenly everybody looked up and listened, and everybody came happy laughter, and then stood Betsy laughing. Then the children joined in, the mayor started laughing. Everybody just laughed, and everybody except was George. Betsy came running down the ramp, threw her arms around George and kissed him. Don't be sad, George. The whole thing was so funny. I never laughed so much in my life. I'm so glad you're at the hospital with me. Now the director of the hospital spoke. I am sorry this happened, Mr. Mayor, but I need to help clean up the mess and be done with it. George just made a terrible mess. You made it look sad. Betsy happy to get, and more than has been done. Now a friend just came and to take the home. So goodbye, George. Take care of yourself. The children crowd, windows waved goodbye, and George then, with the man in yellow hat, finally left the hospital. As the car was turning to the driveway, Nurse Carol came running after him. Here's a little package, a little something that belongs to you, George. But don't open it before you get our home. George was curious and what would happen be not. But the moment he reached home, he ripped up the paper box, toward the box, and there was a piece of a puzzle that had caused a lot of the trouble. How nice the doctor used to save it for you. The man with the ill hat, and now we have finished the puzzle. The end.